You're listening to The Bible Guys, a podcast where a couple of friends talk about the Bible in fun and practical ways.
Hey, everybody, welcome to The Bible Guys.
We're going to get down to business.
We are, because we have a big chapter.
It's a big one.
But before we do that, we're going to launch into one of our favorite segments, which is the Dad Joke Competition. Well, maybe that should be the intro. We should always just say it in unison.
Just say it in unison?
The Dad Joke Competition. That's terrible.
Well, these are super important to us personally,
yes.
Being dads.
Yes. Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
We have 5 each. I've been called a computer. It has nothing to do with my intelligence. I go to sleep if I'm left unattended for 15 minutes.
Okay.
That's not bad.
Well, that's all right. There you go. How do you make the number 1 disappear? Just add a G and it's gone.
Oh my goodness.
Add
a G in front of it.
In front of one.
Yes.
And then you add G, and then it's not 1 anymore. It's gone.
When it says add a G, I was picturing adding a G at the end.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, what?
Yeah, that was a thinker.
Yeah, that was a thinker.
And then it said number 1, not just 1.
Well, it was,
so you're thinking the
yes,
number.
And then also it's a reading thing.
Yeah. Did we just take 45 seconds breaking down this joke?
Here we go. Number 2. Just so everyone's clear, I'm going to put my glasses on. Just so
I like that one.
Just so everyone's clear.
I'm going to steal that one.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. My pet frog broke his leg this morning. He's very unhappy.
Oh, that's really rough. It's so rough, it's good.
Yeah.
All right, number 3. If laziness were an Olympic sport, I'd make sure I came in 4th just so I wouldn't have to walk up to the podium.
Okay. A blind man walks into a bar, and then a table, and then a chair.
Oh,
That was terrible.
it was terrible.
Did she just make me read like a blind man joke?
Yeah, and not only that, but you made fun of a blind man.
I didn't make fun of him. I just read what was given to me.
I
I didn't even pre-read these.
She made you.
Oh,
make fun
no.
of him. All right, here you go. Ready?
No, please, if you're mad, send a mad email to cesarba@thebibleguys.com.
Or Desiree at BibleGuys.com. All right, Here we go. Number 4. What weighs more, a gallon of water or a gallon of butane? A gallon of water, because butane is a lighter fluid.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
It's terrible.
My wife just told me to put the toilet seat down. I don't know why I was carrying it around in the first place. That's a dumb one.
I like that one.
Yeah, okay.
It was good.
Okay.
All right, here we go. What do you call the pink fleshy bits between sharks' teeth?
I don't know.
Slow swimmers.
Slow swimmers. Okay.
As if a fast swimmer could outswim a shark.
That's right. It's not going to happen. I just saw my wife trip over and drop a basket of clothes she just ironed. I watched it all unfold.
Oh, but I'm bummed.
That was a rough one.
Yeah, well, it's clever, though. It is clever.
I watched it all unfold.
Yes, the event and the basket.
Yes.
Hey, by the way, I just realized something. A faster swimmer doesn't need to outswim a shark. He just needs to outswim the person next to him.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, I had to throw that in.
Are you a good swimmer?
I used to be.
Used to be.
Yeah, I'd say I'm probably adequate for a person my age at this point.
Uh-huh.
But, I get that rotator cuff thing. I get that bulging disc spine thing.
So you're saying there's a chance?
So you're saying there's a chance. I'm saying there's a chance anybody could beat me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, you got a bad back, you got a bad neck, you got a bad shoulder.
Yes. Now, based on my trainer and based on me working out, I would guess that I could swim just fine and fast.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You guess?
Yeah, my guess is I could do that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to... So then...
But you never know until you try.
If a shark's coming after us, I just need to pop you really hard in the neck. And I can karate chop you on the neck, pop you in the shoulder.
Dude, that would actually work. That would actually work.
Yeah. Okay.
It's horrible. What a horrible thought. Oh, yeah. They're just sitting there getting eaten.
All right.
That's horrible.
Give me a chance. Okay.
All right. So we're going to dive right into one of the most famous stories of David's life. I would say the most famous, obviously, is David and Goliath.
Right.
And I would say the second most famous, I would think, would be this story, which is David and Bathsheba.
Oh, yeah. I did this before. Back when I think 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I think it generally society was a little bit more biblically literate with regard to the stories of the Bible.
Sure they were.
Now, a lot of people don't know who Samson was. They don't know, right? You have to explain things more. So I can remember probably 25 or 30 years ago, I did a thing and I asked people, just say the first thing that comes to your mind when I say, and I said Samson and people said Delilah. And I said David and it was Goliath first, Bathsheba second. Yeah. And it was that fast, right? So
there you go. All right.
So here we are. We're going to read about David and Bathsheba today. David was a great king, but he was also human, and he made terrible mistakes and committed terrible sins. And so it says here in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told she's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after having her menstrual period, and then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, he sent David a message saying, I'm pregnant. Then David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent him to David. When Uriah arrived, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how the war was progressing. And then he told Uriah, go on home and relax. David even sent a gift to Uriah after he left the palace, but Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. When David heard that Uriah had not gone home, he summoned him and asked, what's the matter? Why didn't you go home last night after being away for so long? And Uriah replied, the ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents, and Joab and my master's men are camping in the open fields. How could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear that I would never do such a thing. Well, stay here today, David told him, and tomorrow you may return to the army. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited him to dinner and got him drunk, but even then he couldn't get Uriah to go home to his wife. Again, he slept at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. In the spring of the year, when kings... Oh, I'm reading it again. That's the same one.
Oh, yeah, so just skip down to...
Yeah.
Right there.
So then in verse 14 it says, so the next morning David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab, station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest, and then pull back so that he will be killed. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting, and when the enemy soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed, along with several other Israelite soldiers. Then Joab sent a battle report to David. He told his messenger, report all of the news of the battle to the king. But he might get angry and ask, why did the troops go so close to the city? Didn't they know there would be shooting from the walls? Wasn't Abimelech, son of Gibeon, killed at Thebez by a woman who threw a millstone down on him from the wall? Why would you get so close to the wall? And tell him Uriah the Hittite was killed too. So the messenger went to Jerusalem and gave a complete report to David. And the enemy came out against us in the fields. And he said, and as we chased them back to the city gate, the archers on the wall shot arrows at us, and some of the king's men were killed, including Uriah the Hittite. Well, tell Joab not to be discouraged, David said. The sword devours this one today and that one tomorrow. Fight harder next time and conquer the city. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. When the period of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her to the palace, and she became one of his wives. Then she gave birth to a son, but the Lord was displeased with what David had done.
You think?
Yeah. It's pretty horrible.
Yeah, so there's the snowball effect of sin. So it starts with, people always say it starts with the lust, where David was watching her take a bath, but that's not really where it started, did it?
No.
So
it started way out ahead of that.
Yeah, well, it started when it said there's a time when kings should go off to war, which is where you started to read. And by the way, that little hiccup in the middle of the passage was we're reading from the chronological Bible,
right.
And it started in 1 Chronicles 20. It inserted that in there because these are the same stories. Oftentimes Chronicles and 2 Samuel record the same thing. So Anyway, so yeah, it's a time when kings should be off at war. So the Bible literally includes the fact that David was at home when kings should be at war.
Right.
So that's really that's really where it began. In other words, David was out, you could argue and say comparably outside of God's will.
Right.
Because he's the leader of the nation, he's the leader of the army, and he's representing God's agenda, and yet he should be at war and he's not.
And we didn't cover the fact that we skipped over the passage where God, after David unified the whole nation, God told him, now go finish the job and destroy all of the enemies of God's people. Destroy them all. Yeah. So it was David's job. It wasn't just a thing that David was doing because he's a mean guy.
Right.
It was his job that God gave him. Remember the other day we talked about how David's told God, I want to build you a temple. I want to build you a building a house because I'm living in a palace. And God said, no, David, I'm going to bless you because you want to bless me. But what we didn't cover is the fact that God said, no, your job is not to build me a temple. I'll let your son do it. Your job is to go and continue to finish wiping out the enemies. And he said, because you have blood on your hands, I don't want you being the one building my temple, right?
Right.
But your job is to be that bloody man. Your job is to be the one who wipes out the enemies of God and God's people. And so it wasn't like this was something that, it's just another Saturday. All the guys are going out and doing it. I should do it too. Nah, I'm tired. I want to stay home. It's not a pickup softball game.
Right.
This was his job. And then it was that time of the year. It talks about, it's the beginning of the year. This would have been March or April. The Hebrew calendar, kind of the beginning of the year changes a little bit. But it would have been March or April. Planting would have been done, and the rains were over. Mm-hmm. So now it would have been dry enough that typically the time that you would be most in danger in a kingdom would be sometime right after the planting. Mm. And then the next time that you'd be really in danger is right about harvest time. And so you can count on the fact that your enemies are probably on the warpath. They're on the way. And so a good king oftentimes would preemptively take his bigger army and try to catch the enemy army heading towards the attack. So bring the attack to them instead of letting them come all the way and put your cities under siege. That was the idea. So when it says it was about that, so it says in 2 Samuel 11, in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sends Joab, his top general, say, hey, you go do it. He's the greatest warrior in the history of Israel, but he sends Joab, a surrogate to do it for him.
So many people probably wonder, how was David able to see Bathsheba? This is just a practical answer. His palace would have been higher. His palace would have been grander. His palace would have been on a hill. And then also acknowledging the fact that Bathsheba was wife to Uriah the Hittite, who was also in the army. But because Bathsheba's house was right next to David's, it's also an indicator that he was a very prominent man. He was a prominent man in the war because, if you live next to the palace, then, it's not going to be a shack. Yeah. It's going to be a prominent structure.
Right.
And
David, so the city of Jerusalem, the city of David, the part that he took from the Jebusites is on a slanted part of what is now modern Jerusalem. You've been to the city of David part of Jerusalem, right? And so the palace was at the top of that hill, and everything in the city was below him.
And it's smaller than you think.
Yeah. It's not very big.
Yeah, it's not very big.
It's a few 100 yards wide and less than a mile long.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say? Maybe a half mile long.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And so he's elevated already because that's where you build palaces on top of hills. And then and he's looking down, so he sees Bathsheba. And then what does he do? The sin of him not being at war, when he should be outside of God's will, leads to being somewhere where he shouldn't be.
Right.
And then that leads to him saying, "Oh, I'm going to go ahead and pursue that which I desire," knowing that it's wrong. And then, he calls Bathsheba in, and then what does he do? He leverages his position. So that's a dangerous thing. That's a warning against all spiritual leaders, right?
Right.
When you are able to leverage your influence to get what you want, it doesn't have to be a sexual sin. It could be any sin. It could be a money sin, right? It could be anything where if you're a leader in a position of a nonprofit organization, and heck, listen, this applies to bosses leveraging their influence, right? And so anyway...
Well, the Bible pretty much sums it up that there's only three kinds of sins: the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, right? Yep. So you're looking at lust is one of the things that we leverage our power for. It's stuff, money. We try to leverage our power for to get around, and then the pride of life is fame.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the three sins.
Yeah.
Everything falls into those categories.
And I would say also the pride of life you could probably include some selfish driven things as well, right? Yeah. Self-promoting, self-gaining, right?
Yeah. Yes, that fame stuff.
Fame. Yeah. And so anyway, so then after that, then what happens is then he acts on his desire. He forces Bathsheba. Based on his influence, Bathsheba, we were just left to assume that she probably has no choice. Now, she could have been a co-conspirator in it.
Yeah. Well, when people come and give David bad news, he kills them.
Right.
So just bad news.
Right.
So when she gives him the bad news of, no, I'm not sleeping with you, what would happen?
Yeah.
Right. So this was a rape.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no other way around it. Sometimes people point, well, she was taking a bath on the roof. Everybody took baths on the roof.
Right.
They didn't have bathrooms and showers.
Right.
And so that would have been the place, a place that there was an expectation that you had a certain amount of privacy on the roof of your home. Right. And so she wasn't out there, I don't believe, trying to tempt David. She was just doing what you do. And you're supposed to look away. In a lot of those cultures, you and I have been in places before where their sense of modesty is a little bit more flexible than ours.
Yes.
And so the idea where, I've been in villages before where, say nursing a baby openly or whatever, the idea is that the village just kind of looks away, right? Is different than, and there's kind of a growing expectation in America that way. But for the most part, culturally, it's still a surprise.
Except in Kenya.
Yeah. It's still a surprise. But in a lot of the developing places we've been to, that's just the thing. And you look away. That's what you're supposed to do. And so the idea would be that you have a right to privacy on your property, and others should look away, and David chose not to.
When we were all in Kenya, they weren't trying to be immodest to look at us because of nakedness.
Oh, right.
It was because we were white as ghosts.
Right. Very curious.
And so it was like we would take our shirts off, and they would just, like gawk at us.
Yeah.
And in fact, we had this room where there was like little like spaces in between the walls.
Yeah.
And these little kids would look. They were gawking. They were all lined up and gawking, watching us change. Mm-hmm. And I realized very, very quickly, because then they made comments and said, "White as ghosts."
Yeah. We had little boys, me and Bill, our friend Bill, and they grabbed our shorts they thought we were ghosts, and they grabbed our shorts to check and see if we were really men. They looked in our shorts to see if we were men.
Oh no.
Yeah, so a very different view than the way that, our sense of modesty. So I don't think that there's any indication that Bathsheba was doing anything inappropriate.
Yeah.
But David certainly was. He was on the prowl.
Right.
He was probably bored with being a successful warrior. He's a little tired. Maybe his joints are hurting. He's got a sore neck or his rotator cuff's hurting.
He's in his late 30s. Right.
And he decides, hey, I want to stay home. I don't want to go out today. Yeah. And they're going to Amman, by the way. So Rabbah.
I wonder if he was a good swimmer at this time.
Yeah. Rabbah is modern day Amman, Jordan.
Oh.
And you can see Jerusalem from Amman, which is pretty amazing. At nighttime, the lights of Jerusalem you can see from Amman. It's not very far. And so just across the Jordan River a ways, maybe 60 miles or so. I think it's 100 miles to drive it, but it's like 65 miles across from mountain to mountain, right? Yeah. So you can see it because Amman, Jordan, or Rabbah here would be a lot higher even than Jerusalem. So you're kind of looking down there. So it's not very far. This isn't that big of a battle. We're just going to go and wipe out the Ammonites, and Joab can do it. And I think you've got a certain amount of boredom, and there is something about that men are supposed to work. We're supposed to work, and it's hard to get into sin when you're actually working. Right. But he's not. He's throwing off his responsibilities, and he's overly confident in his power and in his might. And it's interesting because yesterday we just read, I don't trust in war horses and chariots and that kind of stuff. But today he's trusting in his war horses and chariots,
right?
And that's where he goes off the rails.
And I think it's the Book of James. What says sin leads to more sin, and sin when
Book of James.
Yeah, and it leads to death, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is the snowball rolling down the hill gets bigger. He's out of God's will. He's somewhere where he shouldn't be. He acts upon his desires, and then what does that turn into? It turns into manipulation of Uriah. He calls Uriah back, and then it turns into murder eventually. But before it turns into murder, you know what? One of the most convicting things about this entire story is that he actually hands Uriah his own death sentence because Uriah is so noble.
Yeah.
So the Bible goes out of its way to say Uriah wouldn't go home. He has so much character. He says, "Oh, my men are suffering."
What a man.
What a guy.
What a man.
He says, "I'm not going to go home and be with my wife and my kids
indulge in the luxury and the joys of my home when all of my fighting buddies are still stuck out in tents out in the field."
So I will sleep at the gates.
Yeah.
So he sleeps at the gates on the ground, I'm assuming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, maybe on a bench or something.
Yeah.
And then David tries to get him drunk even in a state where he's not even necessarily controlled by his, morality compass. He still doesn't go home.
Yeah.
And so this man is a good man. And then David's like, "Hey, he's such a good guy. I'll just go ahead and send a sealed envelope with my seal by his own hand." At any time, Uriah could have broken the seal and read it. Right. But Uriah didn't because he's a good man.
Right.
And then Joab, he knows something's fishy. He knows something's dirty. When Uriah hands him a letter and then Joab opens it and it says, "Kill Uriah," Joab is like, "Oh, something's going on here."
Yeah.
Which is why he sends the message back and says, "Hey, when the king gets mad,
Because people died.
Let him know there was a high cost for his letter.
Right.
But tell him that I did the job. Uriah's dead."
Yeah.
And then what does David do? Oh, now I understand. Well, tell him don't be discouraged.
Right.
I know you lost some men, but hey, his word was carried out. It's a terrible progression of sin, right?
And sin always goes farther than you meant for it to go.
Right.
Right. Was that old song? Sin will take you farther than you want to go. It'll keep you longer than you want to stay. It'll cost you more than you want to pay.
That's right. That's right.
Here's a life application study note. In the episode with Bathsheba, David allowed himself to fall deeper and deeper into sin, which is what happens. You spiral.
Yep.
You ever hear somebody say, "What happened? How did I get here?" Right. I've had so many people tell me that. And then it's just a series of bad choices. So it says, 1, David abandoned his purpose by staying home from war. 2, he focused on his own desires. 3, when temptation came, he looked into it instead of turning away from it.
Right.
What a good phrase. 4, he sinned deliberately. He did it on purpose. 5, he tried to cover up his sin by deceiving others. 6, he committed murder to continue the cover-up. And eventually David's sin was exposed, and it was punished. The consequences of David's sin were far-reaching, affecting many others. David could have chosen to stop and turn from evil at any stage along the way. But once sin gets started, it's difficult to stop. The deeper the mess, the less we want to admit having caused it. It's much easier to stop sliding down a hill when you're near the top than when you're halfway down. The best solution is to stop sin before it starts.
Yeah.
That is full of rich stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's easier to stop at the top of the hill than it is halfway down.
This is, I've compared this before to Genesis chapter 2, where, it's the temptation in the garden.
Yeah.
Where it starts with, just a what? Doubting God's word, right? Doubting God, basically, right?
Right.
Just to say, hath God said? Did God really say? Did God really say that you're supposed to be at war? Right. Is it really necessary to be where God told you to be? Can't you bend the rules?
Right.
And that's where it starts in the garden, and that's where it starts here, and the progression really is the same. So. Well, hey, that's a lot, and there's a lot packed in there, and I'm sure we can probably do a whole series on just that one chapter, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Several weeks. That could be a 4-week series right there. So, anyway, well, hey, we'll continue on in the story because next podcast we get a confrontation from the prophet of God.
Yep. Here it comes.
Yeah, here it comes. We'll see you then on the Bible Guys.